everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a pretty big topic, the connection between art, our brains, and what it means to be human.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area.
Yeah, and we've got a whole bunch of research and lectures to sort through today.
We do.
And our mission is to uncover how art, from like ancient cave paintings to the music we listen to today, is all intertwined with our brains, emotions, and even our evolution.
It really is amazing stuff. And, we often think about culture and biology as these separate things,
Right, right.
but they're constantly in this dance, influencing each other back and forth.
So you're saying it's not just that our biology shapes our culture, but also that our culture can shape our biology.
Exactly. A good example of that is the development of dairy farming.
Okay.
That cultural shift led to people actually changing genetically. We see lactose tolerance becoming more common
Oh, wow.
in populations that embrace dairy farming.
So our choices, our cultural choices, can have an actual impact on our genes.
Yeah, powerful stuff.
That's a powerful idea.
It is.
So how does this then relate to art?
Well, some researchers believe that art might have actually evolved in a similar way.
Okay.
Like maybe those early forms of art gave our ancestors a survival advantage.
Interesting.
Yeah, think about it. Before we had complex language drumming, chanting, cave paintings, these could have been ways for groups to communicate and bond together, coordinate their actions.
So it's not just about, pretty pictures or whatever. Early art could have been crucial for survival, kind of like how lactose tolerance helped people thrive in those dairy farming cultures.
Yeah, exactly. They're both tapping into something fundamental in our brains, something that makes us want to create and experience these things.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And that brings us to today, right? Because even though we now have language, we have technology, art still plays a huge role in all of our lives.
It does.
I mean, we go to concerts, we get lost in movies, we spend hours reading books. We're still driven to create and experience art.
Absolutely. And think about what those experiences do for us. They help us process our emotions, connect with other people, make sense of the world.
Right.
Just like those early humans gathering around a fire,
Yeah.
We still find comfort and meaning and connection through these shared artistic experiences.
It seems like art gives us the space to safely explore all the, the messiness of being human. We
Yeah.
can step into different characters' shoes when we read a novel. We can feel those really intense emotions during a movie or process difficult experiences through music.
Yeah, that's one of the big ideas here, that art acts as this kind of regulating force, helping us to find balance,
Okay.
process difficult emotions. Some researchers even call it a homeostatic device, like a thermostat for our emotional well-being.
Okay, so we've established that art is deeply ingrained, in our biology. It continues to serve these essential functions in our lives. But how does this actually play out in the brain? Like, what's happening up there when we experience art?
Well, to understand that, we need to think about the brain as this network of specialized regions that all have their own unique role to play.
So like a city with different districts, each specializing in a particular thing.
Exactly. And just like a city thrives on the connections between its districts,
Right.
our brains rely on communication between these different regions
Yeah.
to create those really rich experiences that we have with art.
Okay, so I'm ready for a tour of this neural city.
Okay.
Where do we start?
Let's start with the cerebral cortex.
Okay.
The outer layer of the brain, often called the thinking cap.
Okay.
This is where we process complex information, make decisions, and importantly, engage in creative activities.
So within the cortex, we have these different lobes that handle specific tasks.
Exactly.
All right, so how do these different lobes contribute to our experience of art?
Right.
Like, for example, if I'm looking at a painting, what's going on in my brain?
Well, first, your occipital lobe at the very back of your brain is processing the visual information. The colors, the shapes, the composition of the painting.
Okay.
But it doesn't stop there. Your temporal lobes are also involved,
Okay.
helping you to connect those visual elements to memories and emotions.
So if, for example, a certain shade of blue in a painting reminds me of the ocean and brings back these feelings of, peace and tranquility,
Yeah,
that's my temporal lobes associating that color with past experiences.
exactly. And those lobes are busy processing any sounds that might be associated with the experience too, like the ambient noise in the gallery or
Right.
music playing in the background. It all gets woven together.
It's incredible how our brains just seamlessly integrate all this information.
It is.
And what about those other lobes we mentioned?
Yeah.
Do they play a role too?
Absolutely. So the parietal lobes up on the top of your head,
Okay.
they help you understand the spatial relationships within the artwork.
Okay.
They help you make sense of the artist's use of perspective and depth.
So if I'm looking at a landscape painting with a, winding path that kind of leads off into the distance, my parietal lobes are helping me perceive that three-dimensional space, even though it's on a flat canvas.
Exactly.
Cool.
And then we have the frontal lobes, arguably the most complex part of the brain.
Okay.
They're involved in a whole range of higher level functions: planning, decision-making, social cognition, emotional regulation.
So the frontal lobes are where we try to understand the artist's intentions, decipher the deeper meaning of the artwork, or maybe, even judge its artistic merit.
Right, and they also play a crucial role in helping us to lose ourselves in the creative process when we make art ourselves.
It's like our frontal lobes are the conductors of the orchestra,
Yeah,
coordinating all these different brain regions to create that unified artistic experience.
that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that we've only really explored the surface here.
Okay.
There are these deeper structures,
Yeah.
the subcortical regions,
Hmm.
that play a really vital role in how we process emotions and react to art on this kind of visceral level.
So like the basement of our neural city housing the, essential systems that keep everything running.
Exactly.
Tell me more about these subcortical regions and how they contribute to our experience of art.
Well, one of the most important is the amygdala,
Okay.
this tiny almond-shaped region that's a real powerhouse for processing emotions,
Okay.
especially fear and pleasure. Have you ever listened to a piece of music and it gave you chills?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes a particular melody or a chord progression will just hit me in a way that sends shivers down my spine.
That's likely your amygdala at work.
Wow.
It's helping us experience the emotional intensity of art,
Okay.
whether it's, the exhilaration of a soaring symphony or the heartbreak of a tragic film.
Right.
It's that gut-level emotional response that can be so powerful.
So even those seemingly involuntary physical responses to art are connected to specific regions of the brain.
They are.
What about the basal ganglia?
Yeah.
I know that they're involved in movement, but how do they factor into our experience of art?
You're right. The basal ganglia are essential for refining and coordinating our movements. So think about the fluidity of a dancer's movements.
Right.
Or a musician's fingers flying across an instrument.
Yeah.
The basal ganglia are crucial for that grace and precision.
That's incredible to think about. Our brains have dedicated circuits for translating, artistic intentions into physical actions.
Yes.
Whether it's a brushstroke on canvas or a dancer leaping across a stage.
It really speaks to how deeply ingrained art is in our neurobiology.
Absolutely.
But it's not just about what's happening inside our heads. We also have to consider how our brains connect to the world around us through sensory input and motor output.
So it's this constant loop, right?
Yeah,
Our senses taking information from the world, our brains processing it, and then we express ourselves back out into the world through these creative actions.
exactly. Imagine your sensory receptors, the ones in your eyes, your ears, your skin,
Yeah.
as these scouts gathering information and sending it back to headquarters,
So the brain.
to your brain.
Yeah.
They're constantly picking up the vibrant colors, the delicate sounds, the textures that make art so captivating.
And then those signals get processed by all those different lobes and regions we talked about, creating this rich internal representation of the artwork.
Right, and if you decide to create art yourself,
Yeah.
it's your motor neurons, the messengers carrying signals from your brain to your muscles that allow you to translate those creative impulses into physical action.
So when I'm sketching in my art journal or playing my guitar, my motor neurons are carrying out the brain's creative commands.
Precisely, it's this constant interplay between sensory input, emotional processing, motor control, creative inspiration that makes artistic expression possible.
Wow.
But we can't forget about another key element, the feedback loop.
Okay.
As we interact with the world and create art, our brains are constantly receiving feedback and adjusting our actions accordingly.
So it's not just a one-way street. It's this dynamic back and forth, with the brain constantly responding to our actions and refining them based on the feedback it receives.
Exactly, that feedback loop is essential for refining our movements, experimenting with different techniques, and ultimately creating those nuanced expressions that resonate with us on a deeper level.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, it's through this intricate dance between brain and body, internal and external, that art really takes shape
Yeah.
and takes hold of our imaginations, but we've only scratched the surface of how art shapes our understanding of ourselves and others.
Yeah.
It's almost like a dress rehearsal for life, allowing us to explore emotions, perspectives, potential scenarios, all within this safe space.
I like that.
Yeah, and that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, it is amazing to think about how art acts as this kind of tracking ground for navigating, all the complexities of life.
It is like a flight simulator, for human experience.
I like that.
We can step into different roles,
Yeah.
face challenges, test out different responses,
Yeah.
and it's all within the safe confines of our imaginations.
I love that analogy. So when I get lost in a novel and I find myself feeling the characters' joys and sorrows, is my brain actually engaging in a kind of emotional workout?
Exactly. And just like physical exercise strengthens our bodies,
Right.
engaging with art strengthens our emotional intelligence and our social skills.
So it's like we're building this mental library of experiences that we can draw from in our own lives. Each time we encounter a new character, a new situation in a book or a play or a film, we're adding to our repertoire.
Yeah. And one of the most powerful aspects of that is cultivating empathy.
Okay.
By stepping into the shoes of others, even fictional characters.
Yeah.
We expand our capacity to understand and connect with the people around us.
So the more we engage with these diverse perspectives and emotional landscapes through art, the better we become at navigating the real world with all its messy relationships and challenging situations.
Absolutely. Art helps us bridge that gap between ourselves and others, fostering empathy, compassion, a deeper understanding of the human condition.
Now that's interesting. We've talked about how art helps us understand others, but how does it shed light on our own inner world?
Well, think about the act of creating art, writing a poem, composing a song, sculpting.
Yeah.
In a way, you're externalizing your inner landscape.
Yeah.
You're giving form to your thoughts and feelings.
It's like translating those intangible emotions and ideas into a physical medium.
Exactly. And through that process of creation, we often discover things about ourselves that we weren't even consciously aware of.
Right.
We uncover these hidden motivations, confront unresolved conflicts,
Wow.
and gain a deeper appreciation for the complexity of our own minds.
Art as self-discovery. I love that it's like having this ongoing conversation between our inner and outer worlds with art acting as the mediator.
Yeah, and it all circles back to one of the most crucial points. Art isn't just a nice to have.
Right.
It's fundamental to who we are as humans.
Right.
It's woven into our biology, our psychology, the very fabric of our societies.
So how can our listeners use these insights to enrich their own lives? What's the takeaway message here?
Well, I would encourage everyone listening to engage with art more consciously,
Okay.
to appreciate its profound impact on our well-being, and to explore how it can help us grow, connect, even heal.
You know what? I am feeling inspired to explore different art forms and use them to deepen my understanding of myself and the world around me. But we've been talking about art and the brain, kind of in this general sense.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears and delve into some of the specific research on how our brains create minds.
Great transition.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the work of Antonio Damasio,
Okay.
a neuroscientist who's made groundbreaking contributions to our understanding of consciousness and the self.
Okay. I'm ready to dive into Damasio's world. Where do we begin?
Well, Damasio starts by exploring something surprisingly simple, the reflex.
Back to Biology 101, we're talking about touching a hot stove and instantly pulling your hand back without even thinking about it.
Yet that classic reflex arc.
Right.
It demonstrates the most fundamental level of brain function. A sensory neuron detects a stimulus, sends a signal, and then a motor neuron triggers the muscle response. It's a simple input-output system.
But our brains are capable of so much more than just reacting to hot stoves.
Right.
So how do we get from that basic reflex to creating art, composing symphonies, writing novels?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Damasio explains that over millions of years of evolution, our brains developed these specialized neurons called interneurons.
Okay.
These interneurons add another layer of processing between the stimulus and the response, allowing for more nuanced and complex reactions.
So instead of that direct line between, feeling the heat and yanking my hand back,
Yeah.
there are now these other neurons involved, adding information, making adjustments, maybe even incorporating memories of past burns
Yeah.
to create a more sophisticated response.
Exactly. Imagine upgrading from a simple on-off switch
Okay.
to a control panel with multiple dials and settings.
Right.
The basic function's still there,
Yeah.
but now you got way more control and flexibility.
So the brain is constantly learning and adapting its responses based on experience, which makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this increasing complexity doesn't stop there.
Okay.
Damasio describes how the brain evolved even more sophisticated structures called interregions within the cerebral cortex.
Okay.
These interregions act like master control panels, coordinating and fine-tuning communication between different parts of the brain.
So it sounds like those inner neurons are like adding detail to the brain's responses, while the interregions are like the conductors of an orchestra, making sure all the different parts of the brain are playing together harmoniously.
That is a fantastic analogy, and according to Damasio, it's this incredible ability to process and integrate information in these ever more sophisticated ways that allows the brain to create internal images and ultimately the mind itself.
That's mind-blowing. So you're saying that the very essence of our minds, our thoughts, our feelings, our perceptions, they all arise from these complex interactions between neurons, interneurons, and interregions.
That's the core of Damasio's argument. But it's not just about processing information.
Okay.
He suggests that as the brain evolved and got better at mapping external stimuli in fine detail,
Okay.
those neural maps actually became the foundation for creating internal images and mental experiences.
So it's not just that my brain registers, hot when I touch a stove.
Right.
It's creating this detailed neural representation and internal image of that experience.
Exactly. It's like the brain is constructing this multidimensional map of the world and everything in it.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And what's even more fascinating is that these neural maps aren't just metaphors.
Okay.
They have a physical reality in the structure of the brain.
Right.
Each experience we have, each interaction we have with the world leaves its mark on the physical architecture of our brains.
Wow. So you're saying that everything we experience, every sight, every sound, every smell, every feeling is meticulously mapped out within the structure of our brains.
That's precisely what Damasio is arguing. And it's this intricate web of neural maps that he believes holds the key to understanding how the brain creates the mind.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to admit, it's a lot to wrap my head around. It's challenging to grasp how those physical processes in the brain give rise to that subjective experience of being a conscious self.
Yeah, it's a question that has baffled philosophers and scientists for centuries.
Right.
But Damasio offers a compelling framework for understanding this mind-brain connection
Okay.
through what he calls the mind-brain equivalence hypothesis.
Okay, I've heard of that, but I'm still a little fuzzy on the details. Could you break it down for me?
Essentially, the mind-brain equivalence hypothesis proposes that mental states and brain states are two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
They're inseparable, with every thought, every feeling, every perception having a corresponding physical process in the brain.
So it's not that thoughts and feelings are non-physical or separate from the brain. It's that we don't yet have the tools to directly observe them in the same way that we can observe, brain activity.
Exactly. It's like trying to understand how a clock works by only observing the movement of its hands.
Yeah.
You could see the effect,
Right.
but not the intricate mechanisms driving it.
Okay.
We can observe the effects of thoughts and feelings through behavior and brain scans, but we can't yet directly measure the subjective experience of those mental states.
That makes sense. So how does Damasio's mind-brain equivalence hypothesis explain how our minds influence our actions?
Right.
It still seems like there's this gap between those internal subjective experiences and the physical movements of our bodies.
Yeah, that's the classic mind-body problem.
Right.
That's puzzled thinkers for ages. But if we accept that mental states and brain states are two sides of the same coin, then the influence of the mind on our behavior starts to make more sense.
Okay.
It's not that the mind is separate from the brain, somehow acting upon it from the outside.
Right.
It's that mental processes are an integral part of the brain's activity influencing our actions from within.
So the mind isn't some ethereal entity pulling the strings. It's woven into the very fabric of the brain's physical processes.
Precisely. And this understanding, according to Damasio, gives us this more grounded and scientifically coherent way to approach the relationship between the brain, the mind, and ultimately the self. But how do we actually get from these neural maps and complex brain processes to the experience of being a conscious self? That's where our exploration takes another fascinating turn.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get how these, intricate neural maps and brain processes all work together to create the mind, but there's still this leap from having those internal representations to actually feeling like a conscious self. What's bridging that gap?
That's where Damasio's concept of the self comes in.
Yeah.
Remember how we talked about the brain creating maps, not just of the external world,
Right.
but also of our internal states, our feelings, our bodily sensations.
Yeah, those internal maps are crucial for building that sense of self, right?
Exactly. It's like after mastering the external world, the brain turns its attention inward.
Okay.
and starts mapping its own activity. It becomes aware of its own workings, its own feelings, its own thoughts.
So the brain is holding up a mirror to itself, observing its own inner landscape.
That's a great way to put it. And through this process of mapping itself, the brain creates the foundation for a sense of self. But I know a lot of people, myself included, have this feeling that the self is somehow separate from the physical body,
Right.
that the mind is something more than just neurons firing.
It's a common intuition, and it's easy to see why that feeling arises.
It is.
But how does Damasio address this apparent separation between mind and body?
He suggests that this feeling of separation is actually an illusion, a byproduct of how our brains experience the world.
Okay.
The mind isn't some separate entity floating above or beyond the brain. It's an emergent property of the brain itself.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say that our sense of self, that feeling of being a unique me, is actually coming from the physical processes happening in the brain.
That's the heart of it. Our sense of
Uh,
self isn't some static thing like a soul or a spirit. It's a dynamic process, constantly being shaped by those neural maps, bodily sensations, and the brain's awareness of its own activity.
So the self isn't a noun, it's more like a verb, an ongoing activity happening in the brain.
Exactly. It's not fixed or unchanging. It's constantly evolving, responding to our experiences, and being shaped by the choices we make.
That makes a lot of sense. But how does this play out in everyday life? How does the brain actually create that feeling of being a self in the midst of all those complex processes?
Think about something as simple as walking through a park. Your brain is bombarded with sensory input, the sights of trees and flowers, the sounds of birds singing, the feeling of the sun on your skin.
Right, all of that sensory information is creating this multi-layered map of my experience.
Exactly. But at the same time, the brain is also mapping your internal responses to those external stimuli. Your heart rate might increase slightly, your muscles tense and relax as you walk. You might feel a sense of peace or joy. All those internal changes are being mapped alongside the external world.
So it's like there are these two parallel processes happening, mapping the external world and mapping my internal experience of it.
You got it. And Damasio believes it's the integration of these two maps, the external and the internal, that gives rise to the sense of self.
Wow, that's really insightful. So it's like the brain is creating this feedback loop between what's happening in the world and my inner experience of it, and the me emerges somewhere in that back and forth.
That's a great way to think about it. Damasio calls this integrated map the proto-self.
Okay.
It's the foundation for our sense of self, the most basic level of self-awareness.
The proto-self, I like that it sounds like a seed that has the potential to grow and develop into a more complex sense of who we are.
Exactly. And as we interact with the world, accumulate memories, and make choices, that proto-self evolves and expands, becoming this richer and more nuanced representation of who we are.
So each interaction we have, each memory we form, each decision we make, it's like adding another layer to that map of the self.
Precisely, it's a constant process of construction and refinement. Think about how much your own sense of self has changed and evolved over your lifetime. You're not the same person you were 5, 10, or 20 years ago.
That's definitely true. So if our sense of self is constantly evolving and being shaped by our experiences, does that mean we have no control over who we become? Are we just at the mercy of our biology and the things that happen to us?
That's a question a lot of people wrestle with. But while our biology and our past experiences certainly influence us, Damasio emphasizes that we are not passive passengers. We have agency. We have the ability to reflect on our experiences, make choices, learn, and grow.
Because it's not a matter of nature versus nurture. It's this dynamic interplay between the things we can't control and the choices we make.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's a dance between the constraints and possibilities of our biology and the power of our conscious choices.
So while the proto-self might be shaped by those initial neural maps and bodily processes, we have the power to shape our own becoming through the decisions we make and the actions we take.
Precisely, we are not merely products of our brains. We are active participants in the ongoing creation of ourselves.
That's both empowering and a little daunting. It means we have a responsibility to make choices that align with who we want to be.
Absolutely, and that brings us to another crucial aspect to Damasio's work, his emphasis on the role of emotions in shaping the self. You know, we often view emotions as these irrational forces that need to be controlled, but Damasio suggests they're actually essential to who we are.
That's an interesting perspective. How do emotions contribute to our sense of self?
Well, think about a time you felt a strong emotion, joy, fear, anger. Did you notice how that emotion affected not only your thoughts, but also your physical sensations?
Oh, absolutely. Like when I get nervous, I feel it in my stomach. It's like having butterflies fluttering around in there.
Exactly. Those bodily sensations are a key part of how we experience emotions, and they shape our sense of self in a couple of ways. First, they create this feedback loop between our internal state and how we perceive the world.
So our bodies are constantly giving us information about how we're feeling, influencing how we react to what's happening around us.
Yes, it's like an internal compass, guiding our thoughts, perceptions, and actions. And that constant feedback loop is crucial for building that internal map of the self. But emotions also play another important role.
You mentioned there were two ways they shape the self. What's the second?
Emotions are essential for forming memories. Think about it. The memories that stick with us, the ones that have a lasting impact on who we become, are often tied to strong emotions.
That's so true. The memories that evoke strong emotions, whether positive or negative, are the ones that seem etched into our minds.
Exactly. Those emotionally charged memories become integrated into our sense of self, shaping our beliefs, our values, and how we see the world.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking deep dive. We've gone from the basic building blocks of the brain to the complex experience of being a conscious self, and we've seen how art plays a vital role in understanding ourselves and the world around us.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope it encourages you to continue exploring the wonders of your own mind and the profound power of art.
I know I'm walking away with a deeper appreciation for the incredible capabilities of the human brain and a renewed sense of curiosity about the mysteries of consciousness. If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to check out our show notes for links to the research and lectures we discussed. And as always, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.